In the cargo holds of military transports, secrets travel alongside soldiers, crates marked with cryptic codes, containers sealed with classified protocols, shipments that never appear on any manifest. Most handlers never question what they move, they lift, they load, they look away. But one man, a single father with calloused hands and a quiet heart, noticed what others missed. And when a decorated Navy SEAL realized that death itself was packed in wooden crates and bound for American shores, only one person stood between catastrophe and salvation. Not a general, not an intelligence officer, a cargo handler who once wore a uniform the world had forgotten. This is the story of the day poison almost flew home and the quiet father who stopped it with nothing but instinct, courage, and a promise to a little girl waiting by the window. Before we begin, if you believe in second chances, silent heroes, and the unbreakable bond between a parent and child, consider subscribing to our channel. Your support helps us share more stories like this one. Now let us begin. Dawn crept across the tarmac of the military logistics base like a tired soldier returning from patrol, slow and heavy with the weight of what it had witnessed. The desert air hung thick with the smell of jet fuel and dust, that particular mixture that clung to uniforms and memories alike. Floodlights still burned against the retreating darkness, casting long shadows between rows of transport aircraft waiting like patient giants for their morning assignments. In the distance, the mountains rose purple against the lightening sky, ancient sentinels standing watch over a landscape that had seen empires rise and fall. Long before, runways carved their geometric patterns into the sand. Nick Campbell walked through the gates at 0530, the same time he had walked through them every morning for the past 3 years. His work boots, scuffed and worn at the heels, made soft sounds against the concrete. The identification badge clipped to his faded work shirt bore a photograph from better days, a face less lined, eyes less shadowed by the particular exhaustion that comes not from labor but from carrying invisible weights. He was 42 years old, though the gray threading through his close-cropped dark hair suggested more. His shoulders, broad and still powerful beneath the regulation coveralls, moved with an economy of motion that seemed out of place for a man whose job consisted of loading boxes and pushing pallets. There was something in his posture, a controlled awareness, a readiness that ordinary labor should have long since worn away. His hands were rough with calluses, but they moved with a precision that spoke of training far beyond warehouse work. But nobody noticed. Nobody ever noticed the cargo handlers. They were the invisible workforce that kept the military machine running, the men and women who lifted and carried and secured while officers walked past without a glance. Nick had learned to appreciate that invisibility. It was a kind of freedom, the freedom to disappear into routine, to become nothing more than another body doing necessary work. The break room smelled of burnt coffee and industrial disinfectant, a combination that had long since stopped registering to those who gathered there each morning. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting their harsh glow on plastic chairs and laminate tables scarred by years of use. Nick poured himself a cup from the ancient machine and found his usual spot near the window. From here, he could see the flight line where C-17s and C-130s sat in orderly rows, their massive frames catching the first gold of sunrise. His phone buzzed in his pocket, a text message from a number he knew better than his own heartbeat. "Daddy, did you remember to pack the cookies for your lunch because I put 2 extra ones in there and one is for you to eat and think of me and one is for you to save and bring home so we can share it?" Nick smiled, the expression transforming his weathered face into something younger, something softer. His daughter Sophie had just turned 8, and she had recently discovered the power of run-on sentences. Her messages read like breathless adventures, each word tumbling into the next with the unstoppable momentum of childhood enthusiasm. He typed back carefully, his thick fingers surprisingly gentle on the small screen. "I found both cookies. The thinking of you cookie is already making me happy. I will guard the sharing cookie with my life. See you tonight, sweetheart." 3 dots appeared, then a string of heart emojis followed by a single word that made his chest tight with love. Promise. He typed back the same word he had typed every morning since her mother died 4 years ago. promise. It was their ritual, their anchor, the thread that connected them across the hours of separation. Sarah had started it when Sophie was just learning to read, sending simple messages that always ended with that word. After Sarah was gone, Nick had continued it, understanding instinctively that some traditions were too precious to let die. Outside, engines began to rumble as the base stirred to life. Forklifts emerged from hangars. Ground crews in orange vests scattered across the tarmac like ants responding to invisible signals. The day's manifest would be posted soon, assignments distributed, cargo scheduled for loading. Nick finished his coffee and headed for the warehouse. Tom Wheeler, the shift supervisor, stood near the main entrance with a clipboard that seemed permanently attached to his hand. He was a good man, fair in his assignments and quick to cover for workers who needed flexibility for family obligations. He had never asked Nick about his past, never probed into the gaps in his employment history, and for that Nick was quietly grateful. "Campbell," Tom called out, waving him over. "Got you on the priority load today. Transport 77 Alpha. Sensitive. Cargo needs experienced hands." Nick nodded, taking the assignment sheet. Priority loads meant military equipment, sometimes medical supplies, occasionally items that came with armed escorts and paperwork that required signatures at every stage. They paid slightly better and required workers with security clearances, which Nick happened to possess, though he had never explained to anyone exactly how a cargo handler had obtained one. The morning passed in the familiar rhythm of physical labor: lift, carry, secure, check manifests, verify weights, ensure proper balance for flight. Nick worked steadily, his movements precise and unhurried, conserving energy the way someone who understood endurance naturally did. Sweat darkened the back of his coveralls as the desert sun climbed higher, but he maintained his pace without complaint. During the lunch break, he found a quiet spot in the shade of a massive C-17's wing, unwrapping the sandwich Sophie had insisted on making for him. Peanut, butter, and jelly with the crusts cut off, arranged in a plastic container decorated with stickers of unicorns and rainbows. She had packed carrots, too, arranged in a pattern that might have been a heart if you looked at it from the right angle. And there, wrapped carefully in a napkin, were the 2 cookies she had mentioned. Chocolate chip, slightly misshapen from her enthusiastic mixing, but baked with a concentration and love that made them better than anything from any store. He ate the first cookie slowly, savoring each bite, thinking of Sophie standing on her step stool in their small kitchen, flour dusting her nose as she insisted she was old enough to use the mixer by herself. He was about to take another bite when a shadow fell across his lunch container. Nick looked up to find a man standing over him, silhouetted against the bright sky. The stance was immediately recognizable, feet shoulder-width apart, weight balanced, hands loose at the sides but ready, military, more. Specifically the kind of military that learned to carry themselves like weapons even in casual moments. The man stepped closer and Nick could see his face now. Hard jaw, eyes that had seen things most people only encountered in nightmares, the particular kind of controlled tension that came from operating in the spaces between official records. He wore civilian clothes, but they fit him like a uniform, and the way he scanned his surroundings before speaking marked him as clearly as any insignia. "You are Nick Campbell," the man said. It was not a question. Nick set down his sandwich carefully, instincts sharpening even as he kept his posture relaxed. "Who is asking?" "Commander Marcus Webb, United States Navy." The name landed with weight, and Nick processed it quickly. Navy commander approaching a cargo handler at a logistics base. Civilian clothes suggesting off-record conversation. The deliberate choice of lunch break, away from witnesses. This was not a social call. "I am just a cargo handler," Nick said evenly. "I think you have the wrong person." Webb's expression did not change. "No, I have exactly the right person. Master Sergeant Nick Campbell, Special Forces Operational Detachment Delta, 11 years of service, 3 deployments, 2 Bronze Stars. Retired early due to what the paperwork calls personal circumstances." He paused, but we both know paperwork rarely tells the real story. Nick felt the old stillness settle over him, the calm that had kept him alive through situations that should have killed him a dozen times over. He had buried that identity so carefully, constructed a new life brick by brick around the foundation of Sophie's needs. And now this stranger was pulling back the curtain as casually as opening a door. That was a long time ago, Nick said quietly. Different person, different life. Webb crouched down, bringing himself to eye level. When he spoke again, his voice was lower, more urgent. I need your help, Campbell. I need the person you used to be. Nick shook his head slowly. That person does not exist anymore. He has a daughter now. He has a job. He has responsibilities that do not involve whatever you are here to ask. Then just listen. Webb's eyes held his with an intensity that demanded attention. Something is wrong on this base. Wrong with the cargo. I have been investigating for 3 weeks, and every lead I follow turns into a dead end. But I know there is something coming through here, something that should not be, and I am running out of time to stop it. Nick looked down at his half-eaten sandwich, at the cookie he had been saving, at the phone that held his daughter's messages. He thought about the promise he had made 4 years ago, standing in a hospital room that smelled of antiseptic and grief, holding Sophie's small hand while she cried for a mother who would never come home again. He had promised to be there, to be safe, to be the father she deserved. I am sorry, he said finally, but I cannot help you. I load cargo. I go home to my daughter. That is my life now, and I am not going to jeopardize it. Webb studied him for a long moment, something like disappointment flickering across his hard features. Then he stood, reaching into his pocket and producing a card with nothing but a phone number on it. In case you change your mind, he said, or in case you see something that does not look right. He started to walk away, then paused. I read your file, Campbell. All of it, including the classified sections. I know why you left. I know what it cost you. And I know that the man who made those sacrifices would not be able to look away if innocent lives were at stake. He left the card on the ground near Nick's lunch container and walked away without looking back. Nick sat motionless for a long time, the desert wind stirring dust around him, the card lying untouched beside Sophie's carefully packed carrots. Then, with a steadiness that cost him more than anyone could see, he picked up the card and slipped it into his pocket. Just in case, he told himself, just in case. The afternoon shift brought a new assignment. Nick was checking labels on a shipment from overseas when he noticed something that made him pause. The crate was standard size, standard markings, standard everything, but the weight was wrong. Nick had been loading cargo for 3 years, and before that he had spent over a decade learning to read situations through details that others missed. This crate was labeled as containing communication equipment, but it sat on its pallet with a density that suggested something else entirely. He looked around. The warehouse was busy, workers moving in all directions, forklifts beeping as they navigated between rows of stacked containers. Nobody was paying attention to him. Nick crouched beside the crate, pretending to check its securing straps. Up close, he could see that the wood was newer than it should be, the markings slightly too crisp for equipment that had supposedly been in transit for weeks, and there was a smell, faint but distinct, something chemical beneath the ordinary sense of wood and packing material. His training screamed at him to investigate further. His promise to Sophie screamed at him to walk away. He stood up, finished securing the straps, and moved on to the next pallet. But he made a mental note of the crate's identification number, its destination, and its position in the loading queue. That evening, Nick picked Sophie up from Mrs. Patterson's house, where she stayed after school until his shift ended. She burst through the door the moment she heard his truck pull into the driveway, launching herself into his arms with the complete trust that still amazed him every single day. Daddy, guess what? Guess what? Guess what? Nick caught her easily, swinging her up onto his hip despite her protests that she was too big for carrying now. Let me guess. You discovered a new species of dinosaur living in the school library? She giggled, the sound better than any music he had ever heard. No, silly. Well, then you taught the principal how to do a backflip, an even bigger giggle. "Daddy, you are being ridiculous. I am being ridiculous. You are the one saying, 'Guess what?' without giving me any clues." Sophie leaned back in his arms, her eyes bright with excitement. "Mrs. Patterson called Mom today." Nick's heart stuttered. "What?" "She calls the office at Mommy's work because she found a paper in my backpack from before and they told her that Mommy does not work there anymore because she is in heaven now. And Mrs. Patterson cried a little bit and I told her it was okay because you cry sometimes too and that is normal when you miss someone." Nick set her down carefully, kneeling so they were eye to eye. The grief that never quite went away stirred in his chest, familiar as an old wound. "Sophie, sweetheart, I am sorry Mrs. Patterson was sad. She was sad because she did not know about Mommy and she felt bad for making me think about it. But I told her that I think about Mommy every day anyway because I love her, and thinking about people you love is not bad even when it makes you sad sometimes." She paused, her small face serious. "Is that right, Daddy?" "That is exactly right," Nick said, pulling her into a hug. "That is the most right thing anyone has ever said." They made dinner together that night, a tradition that had started when Sophie was too young to actually help and had evolved into a genuine partnership. She was in charge of vegetables, which she washed and arranged with the same artistic attention she brought to everything. Nick handled the stove, explaining as he cooked because she liked to understand how things worked. "You have to wait until the oil is hot enough," he said, demonstrating with a drop of water that sizzled on contact. "See that? That means the pan is ready." "How come?" "Because the water turns into steam when it is hot enough and that makes the sizzle sound." She watched with fascination, standing on her step stool to see over the counter edge. "Is that a chemical reaction like the volcano?" "In a way," Nick said. "It is a physical change, though, not a chemical one. The water is still water, just in a different form, but heat is involved in lots of chemical reactions, too." Sophie considered this seriously. "So when we cook dinner, we are doing science experiments?" "Every single time," Nick confirmed. She grinned with delight, and he felt the familiar surge of wonder at how she could take the simplest things and find magic in them. After dinner, they sat together on the worn couch, Sophie tucked against his side. During a quiet scene in her favorite movie, she looked up at him. "Daddy, do you like your job?" Nick considered the question carefully. He always tried to give her honest answers, even when the full truth was more complicated than an 8-year-old needed to know. "Some parts I like," he said. "I like working with my hands. I like knowing that the things I help move go to people who need them." "What parts do you not like?" "I do not like being away from you all day," he said, and that was the truest thing he had ever said. That was the only part that mattered. She snuggled closer. "I do not like that part either, but Mrs. Patterson says you have to work because that is how you take care of me." "That is right. I would not do any job that did not let me come home to you." "Promise." He kissed the top of her head. "Promise." Later, after Sophie was asleep, Nick sat at the kitchen table with a cup of cold coffee he was not really drinking. The card Commander Webb had given him lay on the table, the phone numbers seeming to pulse with a significance he did not want to acknowledge. He thought about the crate he had noticed, the wrong weight, the fresh wood, the chemical smell. He thought about his training, the years of learning to recognize threats before they materialized. He thought about Sophie, sleeping peacefully in her room, about the life they had built, together from the wreckage of loss, about the promise he had made to always be there. He picked up the card, turned it over in his fingers, and set it back down again. Tomorrow he would go to work. He would load cargo. He would keep his head down and come home to his daughter. But even as he told himself this, some part of him was already memorizing the phone number. The next morning brought clouds, a rare occurrence in the desert that painted the sky in shades of gray. Nick arrived at his usual time and collected his assignment. Transport 77 Alpha was ready for loading. He joined the crew assigned to the aircraft, a massive C-17 Globemaster that squatted on the tarmac like a patient beast waiting to be fed. The cargo bay yawned open, its vast interior capable of swallowing helicopters and hundreds of pallets of supplies. Nick worked methodically, but part of his attention stayed fixed on the pallets being moved into the priority section. There were 6 crates now, all with the same 2 new wood, the same communication equipment labels, the same subtle wrongness that screamed at senses most people did not know they possessed. During his lunch break, Nick sent a text message to a number he had memorized years ago and never expected to use again. "Need background on shipping codes," he typed, followed by the identification numbers from the suspicious crates. "Priority." The response came faster than he expected. 2 words that made his stomach drop. "Those are ours." Nick stared at the screen, processing the implications. Ours meant government. Ours meant classified. Ours meant that whatever was in those crates had been approved by someone with authority. But if the crates were legitimate, why did every instinct he possessed insist they were wrong? He was still staring at his phone when a familiar shadow fell across him. Commander Webb stood at the edge of the hangar. "Found something," Webb said. It was not a question. Nick slipped his phone into his pocket. "I found questions. Questions are not answers. Sometimes questions are the beginning of answers." Webb moved closer, his voice dropping. "I have been chasing shadows for weeks. Every time I get close to something concrete, it disappears. Documents get lost, personnel get transferred." "What are you actually looking for?" Nick asked. "Something that is coming through this base. Something that should not exist. Something that could kill a lot of people if it reaches its destination." "Those crates," Nick said slowly. "The ones marked as communication equipment." Webb's expression sharpened. "What about them? The weight is wrong. The wood is too new. There is a chemical smell that does not match the manifest contents. And I just got confirmation that they are flagged as classified government cargo, which should mean they are legitimate." "Should," Webb repeated. "But you do not believe they are." Nick thought about Sophie, about the promise he had made, about the life he had so carefully constructed. "No," he said finally. "I do not believe they are." Webb nodded slowly. "Neither do I. And I think I know who is behind it, but I cannot prove anything without evidence. I cannot get that evidence without getting inside those crates. And I cannot get inside those crates without someone who has access to the cargo hold once the aircraft is loaded." He paused. Someone like a cargo handler with a security clearance and the skills to recognize when something is very, very wrong. Nick closed his eyes. He saw Sophie's face, bright with joy. He heard her voice asking him to promise. Then he thought about other children, other fathers, other families who would never see each other again if whatever was in those crates reached its destination. "What do you need me to do?" he heard himself say. Webb outlined the plan. There would be a 20-minute window when the cargo bay was unmonitored. Webb produced a small device, spectrometer, modified for field use. You get a sample of whatever is in those crates. You press this button and it will tell us what we are dealing with. If it is what I think it is, we will have enough evidence to stop this. And if it is not what you think it is, then you will have opened a classified military shipment without authorization and your career as a cargo handler will be over." Webb's expression was grim. "If you get caught, I cannot protect you." "Give me the device," Nick said. At 14:15, the loading was complete. Nick lingered behind until he was alone in the vast cargo bay. The access card Webb had given him worked on the priority section lock without triggering any alarms. Nick moved quickly but carefully, his body falling into patterns it had never forgotten, the silent approach of someone trained to enter spaces without being detected. The suspicious crates were exactly where he had noted them, stacked in a row against the forward bulkhead. He selected the one that seemed most accessible and examined its sealing mechanism. Standard military, shipping locks, the kind that could be opened with the right code. Inside, nested in protective foam, were metal canisters arranged in precise rows. Each one was labeled with a serial number and a symbol that made Nick's blood run cold. He had seen that symbol before, in classified briefings during his years of service. in intelligence reports about weapons that existed only in nightmares. He pulled out the spectrometer and pressed the button. The result appeared on its small screen. Nick read the chemical designation twice, making sure he was not mistaken. Then he read it a third time because what it said was impossible. The canisters contained a nerve agent, a synthetic compound so toxic that a single drop could kill 100 people, and according to the manifest, this shipment did not exist. Nick lifted his hand to his earpiece, ready to call Webb. But before he could speak, he heard the sound of footsteps on the cargo ramp behind him, and a voice he did not recognize said, "Step away from the crate, Mr. Campbell, and put your hands where I can see them." Nick froze, his mind racing through options even as his body remained perfectly still. The footsteps approached slowly, deliberately, and he calculated that there were at least 2 people behind him based on the rhythm and weight distribution of the sound. Possibly 3. His hands were still at his sides, one holding the spectrometer with evidence that could save countless lives. The voice spoke again, closer now. "I said hands up. We know who you are, we know who sent you, and we know exactly what you just found." Nick raised his hand slowly, turning as he did so. 3 men faced him at the entrance to the priority section, all wearing the uniforms of military security personnel. But their weapons were not standard issue, and their formation spoke of training that went beyond basic security protocols. The leader was a tall man with pale eyes and a face that showed nothing. He looked at Nick the way someone might look at an inconvenient obstacle. "You should have stayed retired," the man said. "Should have kept loading boxes and playing house with your daughter. Now we have a problem." The mention of Sophie sent a spike of cold fear through Nick's chest, but he kept his expression neutral. "Whatever you think you know," he said, "you are making a mistake. We know everything, Mr. Campbell." The pale-eyed man moved closer. "We know Commander Webb has been sniffing around for weeks. We know he recruited you. We know you contacted your old intelligence network." His smile was thin. "We have people everywhere." Nick's mind cataloged exits, calculated distances, evaluated the positioning of his opponents. The odds were not good, but they were not impossible either. "Who is we?" Nick asked, buying time. "You do not need to know that. What you need to know is that this shipment is going to reach its destination, and you are not going to stop it. You are not even going to be remembered." The man's weapon adjusted slightly. "Your daughter will be told there was an accident. Very tragic. She will cry at your funeral, and then she will forget you." Sophie's face flashed through Nick's mind, bright and trusting and full of love. He thought of the promise he had made, the promise to always come home. And in that moment, something shifted inside him. Not rage, not desperation, something older and colder, something he had spent 4 years trying to bury. He had made a promise to his daughter, but he had also made a promise to himself long before she was born that he would never let evil win while he still had breath to fight it. The pale-eyed man saw something change in Nick's expression and his finger tightened on the trigger. But Nick was already moving. The training he had tried to forget took over, his body flowing into action with the lethal precision of years of practice. He dropped low as the first shot cracked over his head, rolling to the side and coming up under the guard of the nearest attacker. His hand found the man's weapon wrist, twisted, and the crack of breaking bone was followed by a scream that echoed through the cargo bay. The second attacker tried to adjust his aim, but Nick was already using the first man's body as a shield, driving forward with the relentless momentum of someone who had fought in close quarters more times than he could count. The pale-eyed leader fired twice, but Nick was never where the bullets expected him to be, moving with the fluid unpredictability that had made him legendary in circles that officially did not exist. He closed the distance in 3 heartbeats, his hand striking the leader's weapon hand and sending the gun spinning away into the darkness of the cargo bay. For a frozen moment, they faced each other, Nick's hand locked on the man's wrist. The leader's pale eyes widened with something that might have been fear. "You," he breathed, "you are supposed to be dead." "I get that a lot," Nick said. Then he struck the pressure point at the base of the man's neck and watched him collapse like a puppet with cut strings. The whole engagement had lasted less than 30 seconds. Nick stood in the middle of the cargo bay, breathing hard. He found the spectrometer where it had fallen and verified that the evidence was still intact. Then he raised his hand to his earpiece. "Lighthouse," he said. "Though I think we are past the distraction phase." Webb's voice crackled back immediately. "I saw the security team enter. Are you alive?" "Apparently," Nick said. "I have 3 hostiles down and evidence of a nerve agent in these crates. I also have information that suggests this operation has high-level protection." "I am coming to you," Webb said. "We need to secure this scene before anyone else shows up." Webb arrived 3 minutes later with a team of specialists who secured the scene with professional efficiency and began the process of documentation that would transform what had happened here from a violent confrontation into legal evidence. The 3 attackers were taken into custody, the pale-eyed leader regaining consciousness just long enough to stare at Nick with pure hatred before being sedated for transport. "Campbell," Webb approached him. "You just prevented a major terrorist attack. Those canisters were headed for a population center on the East Coast. If they had reached their destination, thousands of people would be dead." Nick nodded slowly, the weight of that reality settling over him. Who was behind it? "We are still piecing that together. The men you took down are not talking yet, but they will. We have evidence now, and that means we can start unraveling the network." Webb paused. "You saved a lot of lives today." "I need to call my daughter," Nick said. Webb nodded. "Take whatever time you need." Nick walked to a quiet corner of the hangar. He dialed Mrs. Patterson's number first, explaining that he had been delayed at work. Then he called Sophie's phone. "Daddy." Her voice was bright with relief and a hint of reproach. "You are late." "I know, sweetheart. I am so sorry. I had something important at work that I could not leave." She was quiet for a moment. "You are okay, though. You are not hurt or anything." Nick closed his eyes, feeling the bruises that would bloom by tomorrow. "I am okay," he said. "I am coming home. Promise." The word hit differently now, layered with meanings she could not understand. "Promise," he said. And he meant it with everything he had. The aftermath unfolded over the following days. Nick gave his statement multiple times to multiple agencies, answering the same questions with patient precision. The revelation of his background caused ripples through the base. The cargo handlers who had worked beside him for 3 years stared at him with new eyes, trying to reconcile the quiet man with the decorated veteran described in the news reports. Tom Wheeler called him into his office. "You could have told me," Tom said finally. "Would it have changed? Anything?" "I do not know." Tom rubbed his face. "I hired you because you seemed like a good worker. Turns out I hired someone who could kill me 6 different ways before I finished this sentence." Nick smiled slightly. "Only 3 ways. I try to be efficient." Tom stared at him, then burst out laughing. "What happens now?" Nick looked out the window. "I do not know. I have been asked to consult on the investigation. There are people who want me to come back. But Sophie needs me." "For what it is worth," Tom said. "You have always been the best worker I had. If you want to keep loading cargo, the job is yours." Nick felt something loosen in his chest. "Thank you, Tom. But I think things are going to be different now." The meeting with Webb came 2 days later. "We got them," Webb said. "The network. It went higher than I feared, but we followed the evidence and we found the source. There are going to be prosecutions, and the weapons, being destroyed as we speak. Every canister, every compound. It is over." Webb paused. "You know what I am going to ask." Nick sighed. "I can guess. We need people like you. People who see what others miss. You would not have to be in the field. You could consult, analyze, train. Whatever role works for you and your situation. And my daughter." Webb's expression softened. She would be protected. We have resources for family situations. She would never have to know the details of what you do." Nick thought about it. "Tell me something," he said. "The people who planned this attack, are there more like them?" Webb's silence was answer enough. "Then I cannot just go back to loading cargo. I know too much. And Sophie deserves to live in a world where people like me are willing to fight for her safety, even if she never knows about it." "So you will join us?" "Not join," Nick said carefully. "Consult. Part-time. With guaranteed schedule flexibility for my daughter's needs, she remains my first priority, always. She is the reason I fight." Webb extended his hand. "I can work with that." Sophie was waiting when he picked her up that afternoon. "Daddy," she said as they walked to the truck, "are you a spy?" Nick stopped. "What makes you ask that?" "Everyone is talking about what happened at your work. Kyle said his mom said you stopped bad guys from doing something really bad." Nick crouched down to her eye level. "Sophie, I did something important at work. I helped stop some people who wanted to hurt others. It was dangerous, but I was not hurt, and now there are going to be some changes." Her eyes widened. "What kind of changes?" "I am going to have a new job. Sort of. I will still be here, still pick you up from school, still make dinner with you. But sometimes I might have to help with important things, things that keep people safe." Sophie considered this seriously, like a superhero. Nick smiled. "Not exactly. More like someone who helps the superheroes do their jobs. Will it be dangerous?" Nick hesitated, wanting to be honest without frightening her. "Sometimes it might be. But I promise you, Sophie, I will always be careful. I will always do everything I can to come home to you. Always. Promise." She threw her arms around his neck. Then she pulled back with an expression far too wise for her years. "Daddy, you know what Mommy used to say about promises?" Nick felt his eyes sting. "What did she say?" "She said that the best promises are the ones you keep even when they are hard, especially when they are hard. That is what makes them mean something." He gathered her into another hug. "Your mother was the smartest person I ever knew, except for you." Sophie grinned. "I know. Can we have pizza for dinner?" They walked to the truck hand in hand, and Nick looked up at the sky where clouds were breaking apart to reveal patches of brilliant blue. He thought about the path that had brought him here. He had spent years trying to be invisible, trying to protect his daughter by becoming no one important. But the truth was that he had never really been invisible. He had just been waiting for the moment when who he was and who he needed to be would finally align. That night, after Sophie had fallen asleep with her stuffed rabbit clutched to her chest, Nick sat on the edge of her bed and watched her breathe. The moonlight through her window painted silver patterns on her face. "I love you," he whispered, "more than any mission, more than any medal, more than anything in the whole world." Sophie stirred slightly, her lips curving into a small smile even in sleep. "Daddy," she murmured without opening her eyes. "I know." Nick smoothed her hair back from her forehead and stood quietly. In the hallway, he paused and looked back at his sleeping daughter. Tomorrow there would be new challenges, new threats to evaluate, new ways to serve a world that mostly did not know he existed. But tonight, there was only this. A father watching over his child, a home filled with love, a promise kept. And in the soft darkness of a small house in a quiet neighborhood. Nick Campbell closed his daughter's door gently and whispered the same word he had whispered every night since she was born. Safe. Thank you for joining us on this journey today. Stories like this remind us that heroes are not always found in headlines or wearing medals. Sometimes they are found in the quiet moments between a parent and child, in the choices we make when no one is watching, in the promises we keep even when keeping them costs us everything. If this story touched your heart, if you believe in the power of quiet courage and unbreakable love, please consider subscribing to our channel. Your support helps us continue sharing these tales of hope and heroism with the world. Where are you watching from today? Leave a comment below and let us know. Our community spans the globe and every voice matters. Until next time, may you find strength in gentle moments and courage in the face of challenge. May you be the hero someone needs, even if they never know your name.